Well, since 1949, Washington's provided Israel with more than $120 billion in financial aid. The annual donation is around $3 billion, sometimes more, sometimes less. Friends don't give non-friends that much money. And surely Washington will never roast Netanyahu over something like this.
This is an anti-Israel administration. It's the first administration in American history that is obviously anti-Israel. It's borderline a Jew-hating administration. There can be no question at this point that the daylight that has been created between the United States and Israel has emboldened Israel's enemies and enemies of the United States.
How do you say that? I mean, that Iron Dome system, Ben, that they are using so effectively in Israel tonight was largely funded in part by the United States, hundreds of millions of dollars under President Barack Obama.
Well, the President of the United States still is going to sign over money to Israel because it's politically unpalatable not to do so.
The truth is, Mr. President, your policy in Israel is unsustainable. The American people are on the side of Israel and Israel's right to defend herself. Mr. President, whose side are you on?
Your father was right. We are all Jews.
After 10 months of talking, Washington has agreed a record $38 billion military aid package for Israel.
This is the single largest pledge of military assistance to any country in U.S. history. It's a reminder of the United States' unshakable commitment to Israel's security.
I'd like to thank President Obama and his administration for this historic deal. I also thank our many, many friends in the American Congress and the American people for their support.
With President Obama in his final year, yay! He may be the worst thing to ever happen to Israel, believe me. Believe me.
Well, let's talk about, Cynthia, there are many reports that talks about the influence of the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, on United States politics in general. Did you experience anything in that realm as far as what one would call the interference in American policy by AIPAC?
Yes, I first-handedly and also frontally was assaulted by the presence of the pro-Israel lobby to such an extent.
Physically assaulted?
Well, politically assaulted, to such an extent that my father had to ask the question publicly, what does Stone Mountain, Georgia have to do with Israel? What I was doing was servicing the needs of my constituents, and I was not allowed to do that because I did not toe the line on U.S. policy for Israel.
What line is that they wanted? Were you told directly that you had to toe a line, or explain that to me?
Well, every candidate for Congress at that time had a pledge. They were given a pledge to sign. And I was new on the scene. And so the pledge had Jerusalem as the capital city.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
The military superiority of Israel.
American Congress people have to sign this pledge.
Yes, you sign the pledge. If you don't sign the pledge, you don't get money. So, for example, it was almost like water torture for me. My parents observed this. I would get a call, and the person on the other end of the phone would say, I want to do a fundraiser for you. And then we would get into the planning. I would get really excited because, of course, you have to have money in order to run a campaign. And then 2 weeks, 3 weeks into the planning, they would say, did you sign the pledge? And then I would say, no, I didn't sign the pledge. And then my fundraiser would go kaput.
So, well, I just want to get into this pledge a little bit more. So this is basically something that is mandatory, that every congressperson has to sign, saying that, what, Jerusalem, you said, is the capital of Israel, and what else?
You make a commitment that you will vote to support the military superiority of Israel.
We will stand up to Iran's aggressive push to destabilize and dominate the region. Iran is a very big problem and will continue to be, but if I'm not elected president, I know how to deal with trouble, and believe me, that's why I'm going to be elected president, folks.
That the economic assistance that Israel wants, that you would vote to provide that.
This isn't a question for the congresspeople serving, that they are representing, or they're supposed to be representing, the people of the United States, not a foreign country, and yet they have to pledge allegiance to a foreign state.
That's what
no one questions this.
That's what I was asked to do. And I made it public. This probably nobody had said anything about it, but I made it public, and then, you know, the excuse was, well, you know, those were just overzealous advocates for Israel. So then the tactic changed, and but this is what is done for 535 members of the United States Congress. 100 senators, 435 members of the House of Representatives have to now write a paragraph, which basically says the same thing. So it's not a pledge, but it's a paragraph, and you post it, and, you know, there are these forums you have to go to at the synagogues or whatever. And then, you know, if you don't perform appropriately, then you don't get money to run your campaign. The problem is that it requires an awful lot of money to run a campaign.
Telephone number for those guys that were on the campaign with me during the 2002 election, and I want to get a copy of your tape of those commercials that had run. Give me a call. I'm in office 326-8844. Thank you. What AIPAC did, some members of the United States Congress, rather, they put in resolutions condemning Libya, and they just kept them in the resolutions with Syria and with Iran and with Iraq. They kept putting them in that in resolution, and kept pushing for all kinds of sanctions, all kinds of action against them. And, of course, I voted against the resolution, and others started voting against it. And I think what later I found out, what really made them angry, other members of Congress came to me and wanted to know what was happening, and I was telling them, we're trying to negotiate.
So what happened?
I was looking at CNN. Several people had called me and told me what they had seen and heard, and they told me, look at CNN. And they flooded the radio and TV with commercials. Those commercials, and you have to understand the mode that the country was in. We had just gone through 9/11, and most Americans didn't know Hussein from Gaddafi or Gaddafi from bin Laden. They didn't know the difference. They all saw them as the same. And the commercial, many commercials, put me with them, saying I supported them.
Support and finance International Terror Network.
It had image of the airplanes flying into the World Trade Center. I tell you, I was dropping rapidly in the polls. We had continued polling. I was dropping rapidly in the polling. I tell you, You have to admit it was well planned and they executed it. The afterthought is that, my goodness, they had it together. I lost the election. But you have to understand, you're talking about a forbidden subject. No one wants to talk about Jews. It's a no-no. It's like you're talking about something that's wrong. You're not even supposed to give your opinion.
So you think it's very difficult for me to even ask questions about the Israel lobby in Washington?
Absolutely. Very difficult to get answers. Very difficult to get interviews. I hope you're successful. I wish you well. It's going to be rough.
Again, there's a new Hitler, and he's the president of Iran, and he intends to build nuclear weapons, and his brazen declarations against the Jews in America have been carried on the front pages of America's newspapers. Ladies and gentlemen, we must demonstrate courage. We must demonstrate intellectual honesty. We must demonstrate the willingness to stand up and to speak out. We must act now to stop Iran before the maniacal dream of exterminating the Jewish people becomes a nuclear holocaust. And I am hopeful that the American government will have the courage to help Israel in its day of adversity against tyrants. I don't think there's ever a time that you can say you have enough support. I think that our objective is to always let our elected officials know that, A, we do support Israel, and that if anyone comes against Israel in a malicious way, we would do everything in our power to see that that was their last term in office.
I'm a United States Senator. I'm not an Israeli senator. I'm a United States Senator. I support Israel. But my first interest, because I take an oath of office to the Constitution of the United States, not to a president, not to a party, not to Israel.
Hagel's record is very, very troubling on the nation of Israel. He has not been a friend to Israel.
Senator Chuck Hagel is a top candidate to become the new defense secretary in the second Obama administration, but there is some opposition questioning Hagel's support for Israel.
Chuck Hagel, if confirmed to be Secretary of Defense, would be the most antagonistic Secretary of Defense toward the state of Israel in our nation's history.
Just yesterday, there was a new speech that they believe in which, during the question and answer at Rutgers University, he claimed that the State Department was controlled by the Israeli government. It was the Israeli Foreign Ministry controls the State
what they're
Department.
doing is they're going after every...
Well, there's two things wrong with that. One is that it's kind of suggesting Israeli powers controlling things. Number two is that of all the branches of the government, the State Department being the most pro-Israel branch is
based on every statement I've heard out of any Republican in the last 2 years, the Israelis are controlling our government.
Not the State Department, that's for sure.
Okay.
The U.S. gives Israel $15 million a day and billions annually for decades, a wealthy country that recently refused President Obama's demand to stop the settlements, an important first step to ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a conflict that makes Americans unsafe, according to General Petraeus. Do you wonder why nothing gets resolved in the Middle East? Money and powerful lobby influence. For peace, pressure your Democratic leaders to vote for me at the May convention. I'll fight to stop the endless funding for Israel and for lobby reform. I'm Lee Whitnam, candidate for the United States Senate, and I approve this message.
Jeffrey Leeds and former Secretary of State Colin Powell, in which he acknowledges that Israel has, quote, he says, 200 nuclear weapons. And the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has not been signed by Israel. Under U.S. law, the United States should cut off support to Israel because it's a nuclear power that has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, according to Colin Powell. Correct?
Shouldn't you ask Colin Powell that? I'm not going to speak to this particular traffic, and I'm certainly not going to discuss.
Israel doesn't have nuclear weapons?
I'm certainly not going to discuss matters of intelligence from the podium, and I have no comment on that.
Okay. Well, the email says the boys in Tehran know Israel has 200. We targeted on Tehran, and we have thousands. I mean, that seems to indicate that there's a knowledge of an Israeli nuclear program, which would make U.S. aid to Israel illegal.
I think I've answered your question.
Okay, well, let me ask, is that, do I have the correct understanding of U.S. law that we're not allowed to support a nuclear power that has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty?
Look, we obviously support the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I'm not a legal expert on all the tenets of it, and I'm certainly not going to speak about the details that you've revealed here in this email traffic. That would be inappropriate for me to discuss one way or the other. I'm not going to do it.
There were sanctions imposed on North Korea in response to their nuclear proliferation. There were sanctions put on Iran in response to allegations of nuclear proliferation. And now we have this email from Colin Powell saying that Israel has 200 nuclear weapons. Why is Israel not facing any consequence for this?
That's a very colorful way of getting back to the same question you just asked me. But I'm going to refer you back to the transcript when you see it this afternoon to what I said before to your question. Saeed?
The latest poll out of Iowa shows that former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich and Texas Congressman Ron Paul are tied for first place. Mitt Romney is now a clear third. And while the media is still not covering Congressman Paul fairly, the Republican establishment seems to run from the man. One of the most common stated reasons is that many on the right say they are uncomfortable with what they call Congressman Paul's clear anti-Israel stance. But is Ron Paul really anti-Israel? Tonight, the facts and a reality check you won't see anywhere else. So how real is the concern over Congressman Ron Paul's position on Israel? Real enough that the Republican Jewish Coalition last week told the congressman that he was not invited to speak at a candidates forum, even though every other Republican candidate was invited. The same group also banned the congressman from speaking in 2007 as well. Now, let me just say that a private organization, the Republican Jewish Coalition, doesn't have to invite anyone. But what reason did the RJC give for excluding Paul? Well, they cited his, quote, misguided and extreme views on Israel. Tonight, we're going to take a look at 3 of those views. Now, there is plenty on the internet about Ron Paul's beliefs, but most of that has been debunked. Instead of using conjecture, tonight I'm looking at actual statements the congressman has made. Let's begin with the criticism of it's all Israel's fault, the idea that Ron Paul blames Israel for terror waged against it. Here's a video clip that reportedly proves it.
Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, that was better then and it served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas.
The author of the blog where this was posted says that this is proof that Congressman Paul is anti-Israel. After all, he blames Israel for attacks from Hamas. He blames the United States for Hamas. But what does the congressman say? He says blowback, the military and intelligence term for consequence for foreign policy and interventions, is something the United States doesn't want to deal with, and yet is very real. But let's go further. Is he factually correct in what he said about Hamas? Yes. According to Anver Cohen, who worked for the Israeli government in religious affairs in Gaza for decades, he says it was 30 years ago when Israel tolerated and in some cases encouraged Hamas as a counterweight to the secular nationalists of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO. So, it would be incorrect to say that Congressman Paul is blaming Israel for bombings by Hamas. Rather, his position appears to be warning about the consequence of blowback in both American and Israeli foreign policy. Which brings us to the second issue. Clearly, Ron Paul is anti-Israel, detractors say. After all, he wants to deny Israel foreign aid.
To me, foreign aid is taking money from poor people in this country and giving it to rich people in poor countries, and it becomes weapons of war, essentially. No matter how well motivated it is.
Congressman Paul, would you cut aid to Israel?
I would cut all foreign aid. I would treat everybody equally and fairly.
My name is Councilman Charles Barron, and I'm out here to join the Secretary General of the United Nations, who said that this response by Israel to Hamas's violence was disproportionate. And I want to join others in the world who are condemning Israel strongly. This act of killing innocent women and children, 370 was the last count that I had, 1,400 severely injured because you're responding to rocket attacks, when in fact the attack on Gaza happened seriously on November 5th, when Israel attacked and blockade shut off all trucks from coming in and out. They said that trucks, the average truck in October, truck delivery for food and medicine and other vital things in Gaza, the average delivery is about 123 trucks per day. It is now down to 4.6 trucks per day delivering necessities of life, from food, water, everything they need. The banks are collapsing, the hospitals are closing. So in fact, before any rocket launches, Gaza was a death camp. Gaza was a death camp set up by Israel. Innocent women and children dying, not getting medicine and food.
So Lou had y'all signing on to something he didn't even read, and it's based upon, he said someone told him that they went to the conference and someone's outside the conference handing out Zionism equals racism pamphlets. Well, people could do that. That's their right to do that. People could speak and say it's a hatred conference. Ask him to show you in the document that anti-Semitism exists. He can't do it, he didn't read it, and it's not there. So I encourage you to take your name off that bill. Thank you.
Durban 1 was intended to be a wonderful thing, a conference to fight hatred and racism in this world, and it turned into what the Canadian government called a hate fest. Countries walked out, the United States walked out. Copies of the protocols of the Elders of Zion were handed out. A Holocaust denial program was canceled because they couldn't secure it. People were carrying pictures of Adolf Hitler and swastikas. Durban 2, which most of the free world did not attend, had one featured speaker, our good friend, the anti-American, anti-Semitic, homophobic president of Iran, who used the occasion to deny the Holocaust. And I frankly don't think that that's something that we ought to be celebrating the 10th anniversary of. Hatred, racism, bigotry, and prejudice ought to be abhorred, and no less so when they're directed at Jews.
How can educated people today believe the nonsense spewed by BDS about Israel? Well, that shouldn't surprise you either. Some of history's most influential thinkers and writers, Voltaire, Dostoevsky, T.S. Eliot, and many, many others, spread the most preposterous lies about the Jewish people. It's hard to shed prejudices that have been ingrained in consciousness over millennia. And from antiquity to the Middle Ages to modern times, Jews were boycotted, discriminated against, and singled out. Today, the singling out of the Jewish people has turned into the singling out of the Jewish state. So you see, attempts to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel, the most threatened democracy on earth, are simply the latest chapter in the long and dark history of anti-Semitism. Those who wear the BDS label should be treated exactly as we treat any anti-Semite or bigot. They should be exposed and condemned. The boycotters should be boycotted.
If you boycott against Israel, New York will boycott you. If you divert revenues from Israel, New York will divert revenues from you. If you sanction Israel, New York will sanction you. Period.
what happened today in the UN. The United States blocked the attempt in the Security Council to hold Israel accountable. It's always done that. It's going to continue to do that. You see, as long as the Israeli lobby has the financial power to elect the United States Congress and the President of the United States, the American government will do nothing. The United States would have to take AIPAC and make it register as a foreign agent so that it couldn't purchase our elections. But if it did that, they would just create another organization.
I imagine you're talking about AIPAC here?
Yes. So as long as they own the Congress, they own the government. They own the presidency. Look who's the chief of staff of the White House. So you've got, there's nothing going to be done about this. And what's happening, in fact, everybody's now saying, oh, there's two sides to the story. So you've already bought the Israeli propaganda.
This week, a man named Charles Freeman, a man with a long and distinguished career in the U.S. Foreign Service, withdrew his name from consideration to be the chairman of the National Intelligence Council, a key intelligence job. In doing so, he blamed, and I quote here, the Israel lobby for his decision to pull his own nomination. He accused the so-called Israel lobby of character assassination, a willful distortion of the record, and an utter disregard of the truth. Strong charges. His opponents, of course, had strong charges of their own, accusing him of anti-Israeli bias, even anti-Semitism. To answer these charges and to discuss these issues, Charles Freeman is my guest today. Now, in making these accusations, Freeman has pushed to the forefront a topic that previously had been discussed only among academics, policy wonks, and bloggers, and even there it's been controversial. The basic charge is that lobbies supporting Israel wield too much power, which results in the U.S. blindly supporting Israel even when it's wrong.
I don't think that I've been in any respect excessively or unreasonably critical of Israel. I think I have been critical of Israeli policy. And the atmosphere is such in this country now that whereas Israelis in Israel routinely criticize policies they think may prove to be suicidal for their country, those who criticize the same policies here for the same reasons are subject to political reprisal.
But your feeling is that you could see the hand of supporters of Israel, supporters of the right wing in Israel, as you describe it, in derailing your nomination or raising the controversy. You said in your statement, you said the emails make it clear, the blogs make it clear.
No, and this morning, indeed, there were various postings by the organizations that organized the campaign, the Zionist Organization of America, for example, detailing or setting out in considerable detail how they organized research to find material that they could use to agitate first congressmen who were sympathetic to them and later others on various issues. And of course they do not admit, but it is a fact that they engaged in a truly libelous campaign of selective misquotation and distortion and fabrication of facts that are absolutely not real.
Let me just read the quote because I think many people will want to hear more about how you think about this. You said, "We have paid heavily and often in treasure in the past for unflinching support and unstinting subsidies of Israel's approach to managing its relations with the Arabs. 5 years ago, we began to pay with the blood of our citizens here at home." And the 5 years ago, of course, refers to 9/11. So you see our support for Israel as having produced a kind of a tidal wave of hostility that then in some way did cause 9/11. Isn't it fair to say?
I think we are paying a price because our actions have catalyzed, perhaps not caused, but catalyzed a radicalization of Arab and Muslim politics that facilitates the activities of terrorists with global reach like those who struck us on 9/11.
You and I got into this on my radio show, and I am shocked, frankly disappointed, and these remarks sound like the conspiratorial, anti-Semitic remarks of people that we have heard from over the years. And what you said was, quote, talking about Israel and, quote, Jewish people, they're controlling much of our foreign policy, they're influencing much of our domestic policy. What do you mean by that? Because that sounds to me like a bizarre conspiracy theory. Why would you say something like that when it's just, first of all, patently untrue?
Number one, I served in Congress for 17 years. I've seen members question bills and votes on how does Israel feel about this. I must have heard that every time there was a significant vote. But Israel, through its lobby, has manifested so much power over the United States Congress that we're embroiled in wars that I don't believe we should be. Our kids are coming back in body bags. And in the long run, this Israeli lobby is going to hurt Israel. So as soon as you mention Israel, someone claims you're an anti-Semite. The truth of the matter is, I'm pro-American, Sean. And I don't know, I don't like, hear me. Hear me. Listening. I don't like what's happening in America today.
All right, that's fair.
Our kids are coming back in body bags.
Wait a minute, but you're saying,
we're bankrupt, completely broke.
But you're suggesting here that we're fighting wars on behalf of Israel. But you just mentioned the 9/11 attacks.
I think a lot of that has been influenced by Israel.
Hear me now, Congressman.
But our policies in the Mideast have been so one-sided and subjective. Without objectivity, we've created so many enemies, the only way they can strike back is we've imported the terrorists from those actions.
Wait a minute.
So if you question it, you're saying you're an anti-Semite.
No, that's not what you did. That's not what you said. You said they're controlling our foreign policy, they're controlling our domestic policy.
Yes, and I believe they are.
Hear me now.
I believe they control the Senate and the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
That's insane.
And they're controlling our foreign policy.
Congressman, that's conspiratorial nutjob stuff.
I know you need ratings, but just hold it.
I have ratings.
I'm not saying we should be friends over there with anybody. I'm saying we should be objective. We have developed serious enemies from a one-sided policy. And yes, I believe Israel, through their lobby, has manifested total power of the Congress of the United States.
Total power.
And my concern is that taxpayers and the citizens of the United States should control their government, not a foreign entity.
To suggest, as you're doing here tonight, that they control our Congress, that, quote, they are influencing and the sole control of influencing of our domestic policy is an absurdity. It sounds like you are a kook.
Sean, I'm not suggesting it. I'm telling it. Yes, I believe they manifest a great power over America. Let me also say, in the last 4 years, there are 2 separate incidents of AIPAC spying on America. We even conducted a search warrant on AIPAC headquarters. Now, I don't like what's going on here. All I'm telling you is, I'm concerned about America. You and I might disagree.
Will you back down from, quote, they are controlling much, meaning the Israelis, they are controlling much of our foreign policy. Will you back off that statement?
No, I don't.
All right, then we disagree. Congressman, thanks for being with us.
The Benjamin Netanyahu address was 10% speaking, 90% clapping. In fact, there wasn't a chair in the room that got warm for even a minute. But that was not enough for some people. The Washington Post's Jennifer Rubin said that one man in particular had not been nearly as clappy as he should have been. That is Rand Paul. Here are some of the tweets that she sent out, culled from many tweets that she sent attacking Rand Paul. So he sent out saying something that he was in support of Israel. She said, then why would you seriously contemplate containment or propose a budget that cuts aid, including aid to Israel? She said he was unenthused. He was lifelessly applauding Bibi. Oops, almost like he's been faking his support for Israel until now. Ooh, with admirable retweet numbers there. She's doing pretty well for herself on Twitter. She said Paul's staff complains that he clapped plenty during the speech. Fair. Real question should be about record and positions. But that is after multiple tweets saying that that man had not clapped nearly enough.
Yeah, I thought maybe that she meant the position of his claps. Okay, fine, he did clap over 50 times, that's not bad, but not enthusiastically. He didn't do enough of enthusiastic meathead claps like this, oh, let's go, BB, let's go, B-I, 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 B-I.
I would have liked to have seen a woo, 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 woo. That would have shown proper enthusiasm for a foreign leader.
No Arsenio Hall
Not
at all.
And you know he watched that show back in the day.
Okay, look at how absurd this is, man. Look at how crazy this is. In America, if a United States senator does not enthusiastically enough applaud a foreign leader while in the midst of giving him a standing ovation over 50 times, not good enough. You didn't bow down enough to Israel's prime minister.
Yeah.
Political system in the U.S. has been dominated by Israeli lobby for a very, very long time. So much so to the fact that the American people no longer have a voice in their own government, that the Israel lobby has more power and more influence over government policy than American citizens do. But the Likud party has been an unmitigated failure as far as advancing Israeli foreign policy. They've engendered resentment from every civilized country in the world, and especially here in the USA. And Mr. Netanyahu's bad manners of trying to come to the USA without an invitation from the White House via the State Department is unprecedented, and it's very rude for him to treat our president that way.
Mike Harris, is Israel and the United States united, or is Israel serving the long-term interests of the United States in the region?
Well, let me correct the previous guest, Mr. Millett. That is, there is no peace in Gaza. This has been an unmitigated war of genocide against innocent men, women, and children in Gaza, and it's time that the world recognize it for what it is. And if slaughter is the price, you want to call that stability, then you are truly misguided. As far as the U.S. and Israel being united, the divide between the U.S. and Israel grows every single day, and it's predicated on Israel's bad behavior toward the Palestinians and towards its other neighbors. Israel is not a good global citizen, and it never has been, it never will be. In our country here, they practice sedition, and they practice espionage against the U.S. on a daily basis. And they're just not good global citizens. They don't get along with anybody. In the past 1,000 years, this Khazarian mafia has not learned anything since their empire was destroyed. They rebranded themselves as Ashkenazi Jews. They've learned nothing in all of that time. That you can't treat other people inhumanly as they do, and that's really what is losing Israel favor and credibility within the world. The fact that they are so inhumane in their treatment of others.
Joining me now to discuss the rising tensions in the Middle East, former CIA operative, head of the bin Laden tracking unit, Michael Schur. And Michael, both the British and the United States have reportedly made it very clear to Israel they would prefer that there be no military action taken. What are your thoughts?
Well, we're at least in the United States, we're pretty helpless. If the Israelis attack Iran, the power of AIPAC and the lobby here, they own the Congress, will lead to our support for whatever the Israelis do, I think. And in an odd way, Lou, it doesn't matter whether we approve what the Iranians do or what the Israelis do to Iran or not, because in the Muslim world, both Shias and Sunnis will regard an Israeli attack on Iran as being sanctioned and supported by the United States, even if we claim to the contrary. So America is on the verge of another war no one needs, and a war that can't be won by air power alone. And so it's really a gaping hole we're looking into that's a very dark place.
Bugged phones and leaking documents, it's the stuff of a spy novel, but really they're the details of U.S. government spying on its ally Israel for fear that it was waging too much power on Capitol Hill. This is the Senate Intelligence Committee chairwoman, a Democrat, says the situation in Iraq is too precarious to pull back and leave just 3,000 troops there by the end of the year, as President Obama wants to do. But Senator Feinstein has got it all wrong in Iraq, just as the president is wrong to spy on Israel. Here on all that, Michael Scheuer, good friend of the show, former bin Laden hunter, former CIA career operative. Michael, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom
Thank you, Judge.
First thing, should we be surprised that the American government, whether it's the intelligence agencies or the FBI, is spying on our allies here in the United States of America? Or is this something that has been going on for years and we just didn't know about it until recently?
Well, if it was a real ally like Canada or Britain or Australia, we would be surprised. But it's a pleasant surprise to me to find out that the FBI is spying on the Israelis. The Israelis are certainly an immensely malign influence in the United States. They steal our technology. They suborn government employees to spy for them and transfer documents. And certainly they're influenced through U.S. citizen groups like AIPAC on the Congress is politically corrupting. So I think they're perfectly correct to be spying on the Israelis.
Well, what does Benjamin Netanyahu say to President Obama the next time they meet? Why are your people listening to my phone calls? That was me talking to the ambassador while some agent of yours was listening.
Well, Netanyahu will just tell the president what to do and what not to do. That's what Israeli prime ministers do to U.S. presidents. And what will happen in the Congress is the congressmen and women who are owned or at least bribed by AIPAC and other U.S. citizen organizations that support Israel will threaten the FBI with budget cuts or manpower cuts if they don't stop watching the Israelis.
Got it.